the moment the young woman at the admissions desk told me my name wasn't on the visitor list. I smiled and said I understood. That is a very Canadian thing to do, I know. To smile and say I understand when your daughter-in-law has quietly, deliberately, removed your name from the list at Toronto General on the morning your granddaughter is born. I asked the woman. She was kind. She was apologetic in the way people here apologize for things that are not their fault. If she could call up to the room. She said she could try. I told her not to bother. I thanked her. I took the elevator down 18 floors alone, walked through the lobby past a potted ficus tree and a family celebrating with balloons, and sat in my car on Elizabeth Street with a yellow knitted blanket in my lap until I could see well enough to drive. My name is Hazel Cromwell. I am 63 years old, and that morning in January was the moment something that had been cracking quietly inside me for 2 years finally gave way entirely. People who know me now see a woman with silver hair and reading glasses perpetually pushed up on her head, running a property management company out of a home office in Etobicoke, feeding birds in the backyard. They don't see the years behind that. They don't see my husband Malcolm dying of a stroke on a Tuesday evening when my son Daniel was 11 years old. One moment he was watching hockey on the Chesterfield, and the next morning I was standing in a hospital corridor, holding his watch, and trying to make sense of words that refused to make sense. Daniel and I moved through those first months slowly, the way you move through deep water. He was a quiet boy who took things to heart. For almost a year after his father died, he came and sat beside me in my home office while I worked late. He didn't want to talk. He just didn't want to be alone. And honestly, neither did I. I built Cromwell Property Management from 2 rental units into a company that eventually managed 43 residential properties across West Toronto. I didn't do it gracefully. I did it on bad coffee and stubbornness, and the particular fear that keeps a mother moving when she would otherwise stop. By the time Daniel finished high school, we had a life that felt solid. By the time he graduated from Queen's and landed a position at a consulting firm on Bay Street, I cried in a parking lot because I couldn't quite believe the frightened 11-year-old had become this particular man. We were close in the way that people who have survived something together often are. Friday nights meant Vietnamese takeout and old films. He called me most evenings on the commute home. He had a good heart and I was proud of everything in him. Then he met my daughter-in-law, Sophia. I want to be fair. In the beginning, she was everything you hope for. Composed, intelligent, ambitious. She worked in communications for an investment firm in the financial district, and she had the kind of confidence that filled a room quietly. The night Daniel introduced us over dinner in Yorkville, she reached across the table and touched my hand and said, "Daniel talks about you constantly, Mrs. Cromwell. You raised a remarkable man." I believed her. She sounded like she meant it. The changes arrived softly, the way snow does. A small accumulation before you realize you're buried. Daniel mentioned that perhaps the Etobicoke house could use some updating before Sophia's colleagues came for dinner. He mentioned, casually, that maybe I shouldn't bring up the rental properties at her firm's holiday party. Too complicated, too difficult to explain quickly. He mentioned that for the Granite Club charity gala, something a little more polished than what I usually wore might be more comfortable for everyone. Each comment arrived gently. Together they had weight. The spending began after the engagement. Sophia had a vision for the wedding. The distillery district, imported linens, a string quartet, a guest list that read more like a corporate event than a family celebration. I covered most of it because Daniel asked me to, and because I told myself that love was a sufficient reason to open my wallet. After the wedding, I kept helping. I helped with the down payment on a Rosedale condo I could never have afforded myself because Daniel said the neighborhood mattered for client relationships. The Audi he drove was leased through my company account because it made financial sense, he said. The Granite membership Sophia insisted upon for networking was billed quarterly to my business expenses. I told myself this was temporary, that they were finding their footing, that I was fortunate enough to help, and so I should. I was very practiced at lying to myself. The first time I felt something was genuinely wrong was a Thursday evening in October. I had made a pot of chicken soup and driven it over because Sophia mentioned she wasn't feeling well. Daniel answered the door, looking distracted. Behind him, Sophia was on the couch, her eyes red. The second she saw me, her face went careful and composed. "We're fine," she said, before I had said anything at all. When Daniel walked me to my car, he told me she just got stressed sometimes. I drove home telling myself it was none of my business. The real unraveling began when my accountant, Gail Reed, called on a Wednesday afternoon the following February. Gail had managed my books for 11 years. She was meticulous and not easily alarmed, which is why her tone that afternoon made me set down my coffee and listen carefully. What she showed me when I went into her Bloor Street office the next morning were 6 months of transactions flowing through a secondary expense account attached to my property management records. Sophia's name appeared beside most of them. Luxury boutiques on Yorkville Avenue, a jeweler on King Street, spa reservations, high-end furniture, nothing I had authorized. "Did you sign off on any of these?" Gail asked. "No," I said. She nodded once and said nothing further, because there was nothing further to say. That same week, Sophia announced her pregnancy, and I made a decision that I have since come to understand as one of the worst of my life. I said nothing, and I waited. I told myself that becoming parents would change things, that love and a baby and time would correct what I was too afraid to name directly. It corrected nothing. It revealed everything. The morning Quinn was born, I arrived at Toronto General at 6:30 carrying the yellow blanket I had spent 2 months knitting. I was so nervous with happiness that I had forgotten breakfast. The receptionist was kind about telling me. That somehow made it worse, because it distracted them. In the lobby, I sat on a vinyl chair beside a potted plant and held the blanket in my lap and thought about everything I had built and everything I had given, and the fact that my daughter-in-law, Sophia, had had my name removed from a list at the hospital where I had planned to meet my granddaughter. Then I drove home and called Gail. "Pull everything," I said. "Every account, every authorization, every transaction connected to Daniel and Sophia's household. And I need you to call Lawrence Fitch." Lawrence Fitch had been my solicitor for 14 years. He was methodical, and he did not waste words on reassurance when the situation didn't call for it. When I sat across from him 2 days later, what he showed me was considerably worse than the account irregularities Gail had found. Credit lines stretched far beyond what any real income could support. Transfers structured in ways that required explanation. And the detail that made my hands go cold, a property authorization form bearing what was meant to look like my signature. "That isn't mine," I said. Lawrence looked at me steadily. "I know." I drove home and sat in my kitchen until dark. Outside, February in Toronto was doing what it always does. Gray sky, gray street, the kind of cold that keeps everyone indoors with their thoughts. I thought about Daniel at 11 years old, sitting beside me in the lamplight because he was afraid of the dark. I thought about how fear can make people vulnerable to the wrong kind of love. Then I opened my banking application and began the process of freezing every authorized account connected to Sophia's access. Daniel called 3 days later. His voice was careful in the way voices become when someone is managing their own panic. "Mom, Sophia's card was declined." "Yes." "The Granite Club billing didn't go through." "That's right." A silence that stretched long enough to be its own kind of answer. "Why would you do this right now? She just had a baby." I pressed my palm flat on the kitchen counter and kept my voice even. "Daniel," I said, "your wife had my name removed from the visitor list the morning Quinn was born. I sat in the lobby of that hospital alone for 45 minutes. Silence. "That was a misunderstanding." "Was it?" He didn't answer. That silence told me more than anything he had said in 2 years. The calls over the following days were not good. Sophia called once, her voice smooth and measured, to explain that disrupting their finances was creating unnecessary stress on a new mother. Daniel called twice more. On the 5th day, Sophia's mother, Lenora Pemberton, left a voicemail, the kind of voice designed to make you feel unreasonable for being reasonable, suggesting that family required generosity of spirit, and surely I understood the sensitivity of the situation. I listened to it twice, then I deleted it. The dinner at their condo was Sophia's idea. She had set the table beautifully, Candles, the good dishes, wine open to breathe. Lenora sat on one side, looking as though she were conferring a favor by attending. I pressed record on my phone before I knocked on the door. An instinct I am glad I followed. We got through pleasantries. We moved through careful conversation about the difficulty of recent weeks. Lenora made several comments about grandmothers and generosity and the importance of stability for young families. Daniel looked at the table. Then Sophia said, quietly and precisely, "Without your support, Daniel has nothing to build from." The table went silent. She tried to walk it back immediately, but everyone had heard it, including Daniel. I watched something shift in his face, a small, quiet fracture in something he had been holding together for a long time. I did not argue further. I thanked them for dinner and left. I stopped the recording in the elevator going down. The collapse came faster than I expected. When the mortgage payment connected to the Rosedale Trust was formally suspended by Lawrence's office, the property management company sent Daniel a formal letter. The Audi lease notification followed within the week. The Granite Club sent a cancellation by registered mail. Lenora stopped coming by after that. The Bay Street friends who had filled Sophia's social media with cocktail party photographs and baby shower bouquets grew very quiet. A life built on a foundation I had been providing, without fully understanding that that was what I was doing, came apart with unexpected speed once the foundation was removed. Sophia moved to her mother's house in late March. Daniel called me on a Saturday morning in April, from outside the condo building, standing in the parking spot where the Audi had been. His voice was flat in a way I had not heard since he was a child. "Mom," he said, "can I come over?" He sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours. He told me things slowly, in pieces, the way people do when they've been carrying something too long and can no longer hold it neatly. He told me Sophia had managed all their finances from the beginning, that he had believed they were doing well, that every time he asked questions, the answers sounded plausible. "I signed things," he said. "I didn't always read them first." I put tea in front of him and sat down. "Daniel," I said carefully, "there is a property authorization form with what appears to be my signature on it. That signature is not mine." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he put his face in his hands. I did not rescue him. I did not offer to pay it off, or fix it, or absorb the consequences. That was perhaps the hardest thing I have done as a mother. Sitting across from my son in genuine pain and understanding that the pain was necessary. What I did was tell him I loved him, that I would help him find a good solicitor, that I would be there when he was ready to rebuild something real. The legal process moved as legal processes do, slowly, carefully in gray offices with a lot of paper. Lawrence used the word fraud in one of our later meetings without hesitation. Gail's documentation was thorough. I will not detail all of it here because some parts are still in process and some parts I don't have the heart to fully revisit. What I will say is that what had been happening with access to my accounts was not carelessness. It was deliberate, sustained. And it had been happening for longer than I wanted to know. Daniel moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment in the Junction. Quinn stayed with him half the week. The first time I visited, he opened the door with her on his hip and a dish towel over his shoulder and sleep deprivation written plainly across his face. The apartment was modest and genuinely lived in. A bouncy seat in the corner, laundry on the Chesterfield, Cheerios on the kitchen floor. It was the most like himself he had looked in 3 years. I brought groceries. Not a check, not a solution. Chicken and vegetables and the particular brand of oatmeal he had eaten since he was small. He looked at the bags for a moment and then quietly said, "Thank you, Mom." The months after that were hard for him in ways I could see, and ways he tried to conceal. He was learning, at 35, to live within the limits of what he actually earned. He asked me once if I thought less of him for not seeing what Sophia had been doing. "No," I said. "Why not?" I thought about it honestly. Because I didn't see it either, Daniel, and I was writing the checks. He sat with that for a while. Then he said, "I should have been there when they turned you away. At the hospital." "Yes," I said, "you should have been." He didn't argue. I was glad. It is October now. There is a particular quality to October light in Toronto low and golden through the maples, the kind that makes ordinary things look almost significant. My granddaughter Quinn is 7 months old, and she has a laugh that starts somewhere deep in her whole body, the kind that makes everyone nearby start laughing too without meaning to. Last Sunday, my son Daniel brought her to my house in a tobycoke. I heard the car in the driveway and went to the window to watch him unbuckle her from the car seat, that focused, careful expression that new parents have, and I had to take a breath before I opened the front door. He came up the walk with Quinn against his chest and a diaper bag on his shoulder and fallen leaves stuck to his jacket, and he looked like a father. Like a man who had been through something difficult and come back from it carrying something better than what he'd left with. We spent the afternoon in the living room. Quinn chewed on a wooden ring toy I'd found at a shop on Roncesvalles. Daniel fell asleep on the Chesterfield for 40 minutes, and I let him sleep because the exhaustion of single parenthood only yields to time and rest, and I had both to give. When he woke up, he looked at his daughter in my arms. I had picked her up without thinking, the way you do when there is a baby nearby. And his face did something honest and complicated. "I'm sorry," he said, "for the hospital, for not paying attention, for choosing things that didn't deserve to be chosen." Quinn wrapped her hand around my finger with the grip that always surprises me in someone so small. "I know," I said. He watched us for a moment. "She should know you." "She will," I said. "We have time." He nodded. Then he got up and went to the kitchen to put the kettle on. And I sat in the armchair in the afternoon light with my granddaughter in my lap, listening to him moving around in the kitchen the way he used to when he was small, and the world felt manageable, and we were just the two of us, figuring things out together. There is something I have come to understand about love late in my life that I wish I had known much earlier. It is not a debt. It is not a supply to be managed or a resource to be quietly drawn from by those who learn its habits. When love gets confused with financial support for long enough, both the giver and the receiver lose track of what was actually being exchanged. I gave Daniel too much, too readily, without conditions, and I taught him without meaning to that love absorbs without consequence. And I spent 3 years telling myself I was helping, when I was really only postponing the moment when we would both have to face what we had built. Boundaries are not the opposite of love. That took me 63 years to understand fully. They are what love looks like when it intends to last. Quinn is asleep on the drive home. I know because Daniel sends me a photograph from the car. Her head tilted, cheeks pink, the yellow blanket I knitted folded across her lap. I saved it as my lock screen. On quiet Sunday afternoons when my granddaughter grabs my finger and laughs for no reason at all, and my son is in my kitchen making tea, the life I have feels like something I actually earned. And I think that is worth everything it costs to get here.